Hey friends, welcome to the debut of The Irony Shelf. Tonight we open our first volume with O. Henry's The Cop and the Anthem. Here you will meet Soapy, a New York City gentleman whose winter vacation plans involve finding his way to a cozy jail cell and 3 square meals a day at the city's expense. Strap in for a masterclass in cosmic irony, filled with amusement and surprise, as the universe decides whether to help. If you too have a soft spot for life's little ironies, do join our growing circle by liking and subscribing for more literary classics. This helps me to continue sharing stories like this one every Thursday. Now sit back into your chair, grab a steaming mug of black coffee, and prepare to be transported back in time. The year is 1904. The scent of roasting chestnuts, coal smoke, and a healthy dose of horse manure gently wafts through the air. To your left, a Stanley Steamer motorcar is hissing like a tea kettle as it warms up. Some colorful words are shouted as a Ford Model B narrowly swerves around a man delivering milk in a wooden wagon pulled by horses. And the Flatiron Building, towering overhead, is just 3 years old, a modern wonder looking like a giant stone ship slicing through Broadway. A strong breeze is whipping up the floor-length skirts of ladies walking along Fifth Avenue. A few are stopping at the milliner's shop to buy a hat. Others are on their way to the automat to see if a wall can actually serve them a sandwich for a nickel. Meanwhile, men in stiff bowler hats are strolling through the park, off to catch a glimpse of the wooden track currently under construction for the upcoming bicycle races at the original Madison Square Garden. And here, dear listener, we begin our story. On his bench in Madison Square, Soapy moved uneasily. When wild geese honk high above at night, and when women without sealskin coats grow kind to their husbands, and when Soapy moves uneasily on his bench in the park, you know that winter is near at hand. A dead leaf fell in Soapy's lap. That was Jack Frost's calling card. Jack is kind to the regular residents of Madison Square and gives fair warning of his annual call. At the corners of 4 streets, he hands his cardboard signage to the North Wind, footman of the mansion of all outdoors, so that their inhabitants may make ready. Soapy's mind became conscious of the fact that the time had come for him to resolve himself into a singular committee of ways and means, and prepare for the harsh weather ahead. And therefore he moved uneasily on his bench. The hibernatorial ambitions of Soapy were not very high. There were no considerations of Mediterranean cruises, of dreamy southern skies, drifting in the Vesuvian Bay. 3 months on the island was what his soul craved. 3 months of assured board and bed and amiable company, safe from both the cold north wind and the authorities, seemed to Soapy the essence of things desirable. For years the hospitable Blackwell's Island had been his winter quarters. Just as his more fortunate fellow New Yorkers had bought their tickets to Palm Beach and the Riviera each winter, so Soapy had made his humble arrangements for his annual migration to the island. And now the time was come. On the previous night, 3 Sunday newspapers, distributed beneath his coat, about his ankles, and over his lap, had failed to repulse the cold as he slept on his bench near the spurting fountain in the ancient square. So the island loomed large and timely in Soapy's mind. He scorned the provisions made in the name of charity for the city's dependents. In Soapy's opinion, the law was more benign than philanthropy. There was an endless round of institutions, municipal and charitable, on which he might set out and receive lodging and food agreeable with the simple life. But, to one of Soapy's proud spirit, the gifts of charity were burdensome. If not in coin, you must pay in humiliation of spirit for every benefit received at the hands of philanthropy. As Caesar had his Brutus, every bed of charity must have its toll of a bath, every loaf of bread its compensation of private and personal questions. Therefore, it is better to be a guest of the law which, though conducted by rules, does not meddle unduly with a gentleman's private affairs. Soapy, having decided to go to the island, at once set about accomplishing his desire. There were many easy ways of doing this. The pleasantest was to dine luxuriously at some expensive restaurant, and then, after declaring himself penniless, be handed over quietly and without uproar to a policeman. An accommodating judge would do the rest. Soapy left his bench and strolled out of the square, across the level sea of asphalt, where Broadway and Fifth Avenue flowed together. Up Broadway he turned and halted at a glittering cafe, where people gather nightly to enjoy the choicest wines, the finest silk, and the best food. Soapy had confidence in himself from the lowest button of his vest upward. He was shaven, and his coat was decent, and his crisp black tie, already knotted, had been presented to him by a lady missionary on Thanksgiving Day. If he could reach a table in the restaurant, unsuspected, success would be his. The portion of him that would show above the table would raise no questions in the waiter's mind. A roasted Mallard duck, thought Soapy, would be about the thing, with a bottle of Chablis, and then camembert cheese, an espresso, and a cigar. $1 for the cigar would be enough. The total would not be so high as to call for any violent reprisal from the cafe management, and yet the meat would leave him filled and happy for the journey to his winter refuge. But as Soapy set foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter's eye fell upon his frayed trousers and fancy shoes. Strong and ready hands turned him about and conveyed him in silence and haste to the sidewalk, and averted the ignoble fate of the menaced Mallard. Soapy turned off Broadway. It seemed that his route to the coveted island was not to be an Epicurean one. Some other way of entering the clink must be thought of. At a corner of Sixth Avenue, electric lights and artfully displayed wares behind plate glass made a shop window conspicuous. Soapy took a cobblestone and threw it through the glass. People came running around the corner, a policeman in the lead. Soapy stood still, with his hands in his pockets, and smiled at the sight of brass buttons. "Where's the man that done that?" inquired the officer excitedly. "Don't you think that I might have had something to do with it?" said Soapy, as one greets good fortune. The policeman's mind refused to accept Soapy, even as a clue. Men who smash windows do not remain to parley with the law's minions. They take to their heels. The policeman saw a man halfway down the block running to catch a car, and with drawn club he joined in the pursuit. Soapy, with disgust in his heart, shuffled along, twice unsuccessful. On the opposite side of the street was a restaurant of simple appearance. It catered to large appetites and modest purses. Its crockery and atmosphere were thick, its soup and table linen thin. Into this place Soapy took his incriminating shoes and telltale trousers without challenge. At a table he sat and consumed beefsteak, flapjacks, doughnuts, and pie. And then, to the waiter, he revealed the fact that the smallest coin and himself were strangers. "Now, get busy and call a cop," said Soapy, "and don't keep a gentleman waiting." "No cop for yous," said the waiter, with a voice like buttercakes and an eye like the cherry in a Manhattan cocktail. "Hey, come!" Neatly upon his left ear on the callous pavement, 2 waiters tossed Soapy. He arose, joint by joint, as a carpenter's ruler opens, and shook the dust from his clothes. Arrest seemed but a rosy dream. The island seemed very far away. 5 blocks Soapy travelled before his courage permitted him to woo capture again. This time the opportunity presented what he foolishly termed to himself a piece of cake. A young woman of a modest and pleasing guise was standing before a shop window, gazing with sprightly interest at its display of designer cologne and fountain pens, and 2 yards from the window, a large policeman of stern demeanor leaned against a water hydrant. It was Soapy's design to assume the role of the despicable and abhorrent public menace. The refined and elegant appearance of his victim and the proximity of the conscientious cop encouraged him to believe that he would soon feel the pleasant official grip upon his arm that would ensure his winter quarters on the Isle. Soapy straightened the lady missionary's ready-made tie, dragged his shrinking cuffs into the open, set his hat at a killing angle, and sidled toward the young woman. He stared at her with a smirk and a series of fake coughs, leaning into the impudent and contemptible litany of a public menace. With half an eye, Soapy saw the policeman watching him intently. The young woman moved away a few steps, and again bestowed her absorbed attention upon the designer cologne. Soapy followed, stepped to her side, raised his hat, and said, "Ah, there, Bedelia. Come with me. Let's go somewhere a little more private." The policeman was still looking. The persecuted young woman had but to signal with a finger, and Soapy would be practically en route for his insular haven. Already he imagined he could feel the cozy warmth of the police station. The young woman faced him, and stretching out a hand, caught Soapy's coat sleeve. "Show her, Mike," she said joyfully. "Well, I'll be damned. I'd have spoke to you sooner, but the cop was watching." With the young woman playing the clinging ivy to his oak, Soapy walked past the policeman, overcome with gloom. He seemed doomed to liberty. At the next corner he shook off his companion and ran. He halted in the district where, by night, are found the lightest streets, paths, vows, and songs. Women in furs and men in overcoats moved gaily in the wintry air. A sudden fear seized Soapy that some dreadful enchantment had rendered him immune to arrest. The thought brought a little of panic upon it, and when he came upon another policeman lounging grandly in front of a magnificent theatre, he grasped at the immediate straw of disorderly conduct. On the sidewalk, Soapy began to yell drunken gibberish at the top of his harsh voice. He danced, he howled, he raved, and otherwise caused a disturbance that would reach to the heavens. "'Tis one of dem year lads celebrating the goose egg they give to the Hartford College. Noisy, but no harm. We've instructions to leave dem be." Dejected, Soapy ceased his unavailing racket. Would never a policeman lay hands on him? In his mind, the island now seemed an unattainable paradise. He buttoned his thin coat against the chilling wind. In a cigar store, he saw a well-dressed man lighting a cigar at a swinging light. His silk umbrella he had set by the door on entering. Soapy stepped inside, grabbed the umbrella, and strolled off with it slowly. The man with the cigar followed hastily. "My umbrella," he said sternly. "Oh, is it?" sneered Soapy, adding insult to petty larceny. "Well, why don't you call a policeman? I took it. Your umbrella. Why don't you call a cop? There stands one on the corner." The umbrella owner slowed his steps. Soapy did likewise, with a sudden suspicion that luck would again run against him. The policeman looked at the two curiously. "Of course," said the umbrella man. "That is, well, you know how these mistakes occur. If it's your umbrella, I hope you'll excuse me. I picked it up this morning in a restaurant. If you recognize it as yours, why, I hope you'll—" "Of course it's mine," said Soapy viciously. The ex-umbrella man retreated. The policeman hurried off to help a tall blonde in an opera cloak cross the street, in front of a streetcar that was approaching 2 blocks away. Soapy walked eastward, through a street torn up by roadwork. He hurled the umbrella, angrily, into an excavation. He muttered against the men who wear badges and carry guns. Because he wanted to fall into their hands, they seemed to regard him as a king who could do no wrong. At length, Soapy reached one of the avenues to the east, where the glitter and commotion were faint. He set off down this toward Madison Square, for homing instinct survives, even when the home is a park bench. But on an unusually quiet corner, Soapy came to a standstill. Here was an old church, quaint and rambling, with a peaked roof. Through one violet-stained window, a soft light glowed, where no doubt the organist was playing, practicing his skill for the coming Sunday service. For there drifted out to Soapy's ears sweet music that caught and held him transfixed against the winding iron fence. The moon was above, lustrous and serene. Vehicles and pedestrians were few. Sparrows twittered sleepily in the eaves. For a little while, the scene might have been a country churchyard. And the anthem that the organist played cemented Soapy to the iron fence, for he remembered it well from the days when his life contained such things as mothers and roses and ambitions and friends and shirt collars. The convergence of Soapy's receptive state of mind and the influences from the old church created a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. He viewed with swift horror the pit into which he had tumbled, the degraded days, unworthy desires, dead hopes, impaired judgment, and base motives that made up his existence. And also, in a moment, his heart responded thrillingly to this new mood. An immediate and strong impulse moved him to battle with his desperate conditions. He would pull himself out of the mud. He would make a man of himself again. He would conquer the evil that had taken possession of him. There was time. He was still relatively young. He would resurrect his old eager ambitions and pursue them without wavering. Those solemn but sweet organ notes had set up a revolution within him. Tomorrow, he would go into the bustling downtown district and find work. A fur importer had once offered him a place as driver. He would find him tomorrow and ask for the position. He would be somebody in the world. He would... Soapy felt a hand laid on his arm. He looked quickly around, into the broad face of a policeman. "What are you doing here?" asked the officer. "Nothing," said Soapy. "Then come along," said the policeman. 3 months, on the island, said the judge in police court, the next morning. And here, dear listener, we conclude our reading of The Cop and the Anthem, written by O. Henry and respectfully adapted for the modern listener. By 1904, William Sidney Porter, the author behind the pen name of O. Henry, was the man about town in New York City. But he was also a man with a secret. He had recently finished a short stint in federal prison for embezzlement, and he wrote under his pseudonym specifically to hide his criminal record from his new high society friends. He later claimed in an interview that he settled on this particular name at random by selecting Henry from a list of ballroom attendees and using the initial O as a stylistic choice. Although, among other early works, he also wrote under the pseudonym of Olivier Henry. First appearing in the influential American daily newspaper The New York World, The Cop and the Anthem struck a chord with a city undergoing a progressive era shift, where the line between the worthy poor and vagrants was being aggressively policed. At the time of publication, Blackwell's Island functioned as a dense network of prisons and welfare institutions where undesirables were housed. As public opinion shifted, the island became a symbol of neglect rather than reform. Facilities were shut down or relocated in the following decades, and the island was eventually renamed after Franklin D. Roosevelt. Today, Roosevelt Island houses a vibrant urban community, just a quick drive or subway ride away from Madison Square Garden. Thank you for listening. I look forward to sharing our next story with you very soon.